Wow, that was a ton of stuff. Got a few questions I'm going to answer. GB asked the question, are we doomed to be poor? I shall answer, no. I've done pretty well with Galcon. I mean, so we're not doomed to be poor. Now, why do some indies become poor and others don't? I'm not sure. I think some of it has to do with just like luck and timing and stuff. The fact is, the way I got into indie games was I spent 8 years doing one of those other, supposedly, it should have been lucrative type of businesses. I was actually in the healthcare industry trying to sell online medical record systems that my company developed, and me and my partner never managed to get that company to excel to any really substantial point. So I actually sold that company and dived into games once the games kicked up, because the games were actually making me considerably more money than I was making in medical records. So just because it's games doesn't mean it means it makes no money. I was in the healthcare industry, which is supposed to be full of oodles of money, and I really wasn't making any. So, for whatever that's worth, there you go. I think the bigger question on everyone's mind is small games versus big games. And a bit of like why everyone says you should make a small game first and try to release it and try to make money of that before you, or maybe just never even make a big game. And I think the one thing that GB said a bunch of times in his last video was like, you know, everyone says I should just make small games and move on, as opposed to, you know, why not just make a bigger game, a better game, and actually put some real, you know, love and care into it. There's like a whole bunch of things that I want to say about that. One is the whole thing behind the make a small game, release it, and then move on is that you're missing the key part of that unless it's a hit. If you release a small game and everyone loves it, then seriously, like, go for it with that game, because you've already proved it out there. As opposed to, like, if you just make a big game and hope it's going to be good. I mean, how do you know anyone's going to like your big game? I mean, do you have any proof? Do you have anything definitive that you know about your game that makes you think anyone other than yourself is going to like it? I mean, that's where it's got to start, kind of in your heart. You've got to make the game that you want, and you've got to release it, and, you know, find out if it's just you or if everyone likes your game. Because if everyone likes your game, you can move on with it, you know? Like, okay, with Galcon, I've actually made various iterations of that game for, I think, 17 years now. And the one version of the game I made for the Let 'em Dare contest, I just whipped it up in 48 hours, released it as a free game, as part of the contest, like open source and the whole 9 yards, and I immediately got so much positive feedback from the community, particularly from, you know, developers like Mike Hommel, who said, hey, you know, this game is actually good enough that if you changed it from a small game into a maybe medium-sized game, you could make money with it. So I went and spent the next 6 months, you know, making it a bit bigger, so I could release it. You know, part of my strategy with Galcon is it's always a pretty small game, but every time I make a sequel to it, I put another 6 months into it, and it's just a lot of polish and effort and work to get the multiplayer features and everything working really nicely, and that's what makes it kind of more of a medium-sized game as opposed to just a small game at this point. I think that's one of the other things about small games is, alright, I'll admit something. Back in, I think it was March, I started working on a new title. Just as a joke. I was like, oh man, this will be so much fun. I'm going to spend a whole week on it and release it and it'll be great. And here I am, what is it, like 4 months later, and now I'm finally getting to the end of that project, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to release it sometime in the next couple weeks. The thing is like, even though I had the initial vision for the game was like a 1 week project, and even though that vision hasn't changed, the amount of polish and effort that goes into even like a small production like that to make it commercially presentable is quite a bit. Because, I mean, heck, in the App Store, it's not like, you know, day one where you're fighting with 10 other games. There's literally like 500 new games coming out every day or something crazy like that. You know, I've got to make sure that even though I'm making just this little tiny 1-week game, I'm putting like 3-4 months of effort into it to make sure it's polished enough that it gets a decent shot at some kind of action. And also, I've got the luxury of, I've got enough residual income coming in from selling my healthcare company and from the various releases of Galcon that, you know, hey, it doesn't matter if it does good or not. I'm just having a good time anyways. So, I don't know, here's my big criticism on big games. And this shout out is going, I'm calling out GB, Anthony, and Pav, what they're talking about their big games, is what proof do you have your game is going to sell? Do you have any proof at all, or are you just hoping that it will? And you're going to invest like 2 years of your time and effort into it in hopes that it'll actually work. I would highly recommend do like a week or maybe a month to get a small prototype out, launch it, and then see, hey, does anyone like this game at all, or is it just me? If it's just you, then hey, you know, it can be your like passion hobby game that you're making on the side. Like, for example, I've always kind of been fascinated with adventure games, and I'd love to make like a pixel art, kind of Sierra, old school kind of adventure game sometime. I'm pretty convinced that that wouldn't sell, so I'm not doing that in my work time. Yeah, that's one thing that I learned in the 8 years that I was doing like the consulting is every single minute you tie to a customer's project and you tie a dollar amount to that. So anytime I'm working on a game, if I'm really focused, I gotta think, you know, is the stuff I'm doing right now going to be financially valuable to what I'm doing at all? Or is it just, or am I just wasting my time doing it? You know, if I'm gonna port a game, how many days is it gonna take and how much money do I think I'm gonna get back, you know? You know, like when I ported to the Android, I was hoping it would just take like 2 weeks, but it ended up taking a month. So I needed to get some serious payback for that. And similarly, like the other day, I ported Galcon to the touchpad. I realized that port would take a single day. So I didn't really need to expect a huge payback from that because it's got a smaller market, so that was okay. So I don't know, that's the thing. If you're going to make a big game, like let's say you're going to dedicate a whole 2 years of your life to it, I mean, you've got to be thinking in terms of like, how is that game going to pay for itself? And am I really sure it's going to pay for itself, or am I just hoping? You know, that's where prototypes, launching something quick, like within a couple weeks or a month, then you can find out if it does good. Even Galcon for the iPhone, this is after I already knew Galcon was successful on the desktop. I had no idea if it would succeed on the iPhone. So I think I originally made the original version of Galcon for the iPhone in 2 months. And that was part-time outside of my healthcare job. And it had rustic graphics, and I just launched it just to see what would happen, you know? I mean, is anyone going to like Galcon on the iPhone? The answer was yes, emphatically enough that I was able to, you know, leave my old company and start dedicating towards doing more iPhone and then iPad development over the future just because I tested that. I did not spend an entire year making the perfect ultimate version of Galcon for the iPhone and releasing it once I knew it was perfect. I actually released it with lousy graphics that I made all on my own and with no music. I don't even think it had sound effects, and it didn't have any multiplayer. I just got the smallest version I could possibly make shipped out. And, you know, actually, if you download Galcon from the iPhone right now, the graphics in that are totally different than the original release because I actually, after the fact, about a year later, went in and just paid an artist to make me some really nice graphics and really nice menus so I could re-release the game and make it look professionally polished because, hey, I knew people liked the game at this point, so I might as well make sure that the game they're playing actually looks good and reflects good on, you know, my production abilities. But for that initial effort, I just had to get something out and find out if people would like it. And, you know, if you find out that no one likes your core game concept, it is time to move on. So, that's all I have to say about that.